7 steps. That's all it took. 7 steps across a courtroom floor. And 20 years of political power ended before lunchtime. I have sat on this bench for 32 years. I have seen things in this room that would stay with most people for the rest of their lives. But I have never, not once in 3 decades, seen a sitting United States Senator stand up in my gallery during an open session with cameras running and threaten me out loud. He did it because every room he had ever stood up in had responded the same way. Every room sat back down. This one didn't. My name doesn't matter. This bench is what matters. And if you stay with me through every word of this story, you will understand exactly why 7 steps changed everything, and why a man selling coffee from a cart on a street corner is the real reason any of it happened at all. If stories like this one mean something to you, please subscribe before we go further. I want you to hear this one the right way, from the beginning. It started the way trouble usually does in my courtroom, quietly, before anyone walked through the door. My clerk, Diana, has worked with me for 19 years. She has never once come into my chambers without knocking first. That is not a rule I ever had to state. It is simply who she is: steady, professional, careful. On the morning this story begins, she came in without knocking. She was holding the office phone by the receiver, and her face told me the whole story before she said a single word. She said, "He's been calling since 8 o'clock. The message had come through the senator's chief of staff. It was short. It was precise. The matter on this morning's docket involving the senator's daughter should be resolved before the session opened. The senator himself would be present. He expected it handled accordingly." I looked at Diana. I told her to note the call in the record, every word of it. Then I opened the file. James Okafor, 58 years old, food cart vendor, corner of Mercer and 9th Street, 11 years at the same corner, the same cart, the same customers. 3 weeks before this morning, a vehicle ran a red light at nearly 30 miles an hour, struck his cart, and drove away. James sustained a broken left femur, that is the large bone in your upper leg, a fractured collarbone, lacerations that required 41 stitches. He spent 9 days in the hospital. When he came home, the cart was gone, destroyed on impact. The thing he had spent 11 years of his working life building, gone. I kept reading. Officer Raymond Dubois had arrived within 4 minutes. He documented everything carefully. Skid marks, the debris field, 3 witness statements that all matched each other perfectly. There was also traffic camera footage from the intersection. Clear footage. The vehicle was visible. 2 days after the accident, the driver was identified and cited. Her name was Claudia Voss, 31 years old, political fundraiser, the senator's daughter. The charges were serious: reckless driving, failure to stop at a red light, hit and run causing bodily injury, leaving the scene of an accident involving personal injury. I closed the file. I put on my robe. The session was 12 minutes from opening. Senator Martin Voss was already in the building. I want to tell you what kind of man he was, because it matters for what comes next. 4 terms in the United States Senate, a seat on the Appropriations Committee, one of the most powerful committees in Washington, the one that decides where the money goes. His name was on the lobby plaques of buildings he had probably never entered because his committee had approved the funding. He had learned over 20 years that power has a sound, a posture, a way of moving through a room. And he had learned it well. He was already seated when I took the bench. He had not chosen the front row. That would have looked aggressive. And Senator Martin Voss had not survived 20 years in Washington without understanding the difference between pressure and visibility. He had chosen the 3rd row, 1 aide beside him, no visible security, dark blue suit, no flag pin on his lapel. The absence of the pin was its own quiet statement. This was not an official visit. This was a personal one, and he had dressed accordingly. When I took the bench, he looked up and nodded at me. The small, easy nod of a man who believes he and the person across the room occupy the same professional level and has simply accepted that fact as one of the unremarkable conditions of his life. I did not nod back. I opened the docket. The first case that morning was a 71-year-old man named George Tillman. Parking citation the afternoon of the 6th. He came to the podium slowly, moving with the careful deliberateness of a man whose body has started to require extra thought. He explained that he had been parked outside his cardiologist's office for a scheduled appointment that had run longer than expected. He had not been able to get back to the meter in time. He had the appointment card in his shirt pocket. He produced it without being asked. I dismissed the fine. I waived the administrative fee. And I said something for the record, something I believe. This court exists to apply judgment to the facts in front of it, not to make a hard day harder. That is not what this bench is for. In the third row, Senator Voss shifted in his seat and checked his phone. His daughter's name was next on the docket. Claudia Voss came to the podium with 4 attorneys around her like a wall. Gerald Park was the lead, a man whose suit cost more than most people's monthly rent, and who moved through courtrooms with the relaxed confidence of someone who has resolved things this way many times before. He informed the court that his client wished to address this matter efficiently, that a private financial arrangement had already been reached with the injured party, that this arrangement, he said, rendered the criminal charges effectively resolved. He placed a document on the clerk's desk, the practiced motion of a man who has done this exact thing before and watched it work. I looked at the document. Then I looked up at the gallery. James Okafor was in the 4th row. He had come on a crutch. His left leg was still in a brace. He was wearing a pressed white shirt, the kind of shirt a man puts on when he wants the room to know he takes it seriously. He was sitting very still, his hands folded, watching everything happening at the front of the room with the patient, careful attention of a man who has learned not to expect too much, but came anyway. I looked at him directly. "Mr. Okafor," I said, "did you agree to drop the criminal charges as part of any financial arrangement?" Gerald Park began to speak. I raised one hand. He stopped. James Okafor gripped the back of the seat in front of him. He steadied himself on his crutch. He stood up slowly, favoring his good leg, and he looked at me across the courtroom. One word: no. I examined the document Park had submitted. It was a civil settlement, $14,000, signed 3 days prior. The criminal charges were not mentioned anywhere in it. They couldn't be, because a civil settlement between 2 private parties cannot extinguish criminal liability. The charges before this court had been filed by the state, not by James Okafor, and no private arrangement between Claudia Voss and James Okafor had any power over those charges. Not legally, not at all. The document had been designed to create the appearance of resolution where no legal resolution existed. Park objected. I noted the objection. I overruled it. The atmosphere in the gallery had shifted. People were still, the kind of still that happens when a room realizes it is watching something real. That was when Senator Voss stood up. He did not approach the bench. He stayed in the 3rd row. But he stood, and he spoke at a volume every person in that gallery could hear clearly. What he said was not a legal argument. It was not directed at his daughter's attorneys, or at the clerk, or at any procedural part of this proceeding. It was directed at me, and we both knew it, and the 30 people in that gallery knew it, and the public broadcast camera running in the corner of the room knew it. He said it would be in everyone's interest to consider this matter resolved. He referenced the courthouse infrastructure budget, the one that passes through his committee for approval. He mentioned career longevity. He used the word discretion, the specific way certain people use that word, when what they actually mean is compliance. He spoke with the flat, unhurried certainty of a man who has said versions of this sentence in other rooms and has never once watched a room fail to respond correctly. The gallery went completely quiet. I looked at Senator Martin Voss across that courtroom. I did not raise my voice. I did not reach for the gavel. I did not pause for effect or give him the courtesy of a warning. He had already forfeited that the moment he opened his mouth. I looked to the side wall where my bailiff was standing. Bailiff! Deputy Marshal Sandra Gray moved from her position at the wall, 7 steps to the 3rd row. Steady, deliberate, unhurried steps. Senator Voss watched her cover those 7 steps with the expression of a man who was recalculating very quickly and arriving at a result he does not know how to process. 3 seconds of complete stillness passed over that courtroom like a held breath. Then he said, "Do you know what I can do to you?" I said, "Yes, and I know what I just did to you." Sandra, please proceed. The handcuffs closed. The gallery did not erupt. It exhaled. The specific, collective sound of 30 people releasing a breath they had not known they were holding. With her father gone from the room, something happened at the defense table that nobody expected. Gerald Park was already leaning toward Claudia, speaking quietly, his hand moving toward the settlement document on the clerk's desk, as though the next procedural step was simply still available to him. Claudia stopped him. She turned and said something to Park in a voice too quiet for the microphone to pick up. He went completely still. He sat back. Claudia Voss turned to face the podium. She looked at me directly. It was the first time all morning she had looked at me without an attorney speaking on her behalf. She said she wanted to change her plea. Guilty, reckless driving, leaving the scene of an accident involving personal injury. I noted the change for the record. I also noted, because the record exists to be accurate, not merely convenient, that cooperation entered after a parent's arrest in open court, while meaningful and genuinely taken into consideration, is not the same as cooperation entered freely at the beginning of proceedings. That distinction is in the record. It will stay there. Then I asked James Okafor if he wanted to speak. I delivered the sentence first. 18 months of supervised probation, mandatory completion of the city's traffic safety program, full restitution to James Okafor, medical bills covered in their entirety, lost income for the full period of his recovery, the cost of replacing the cart, and 6 months of operational costs administered through the city's small business office. Every item documented, every figure verified, every obligation legally enforceable. Then I looked at James Okafor and asked if he would like to address the court. He adjusted his crutch. He steadied himself. He stood a little straighter than he had been standing all morning. He spoke for 90 seconds. He did not raise his voice. He did not look at Claudia Voss. He did not ask for anything beyond what had already been ordered. He talked about the cart, about 11 years at the same corner, about the customers you come to know when you see them every single morning before they've fully woken up, their orders, their moods, their faces on the hard days and the easy ones. He talked about the morning of the accident, the light changing, the sound of impact, the pavement coming up to meet him. He talked about 9 days in the hospital, about the specific quality of silence in a room when you are lying still and you are not sure what comes next. Then he stopped. He looked at me. "I just want to go back to work," he said. I said, "Mr. Okafor, you will." I called the next case. The public broadcast feed had been running since the session opened. I turn it on at the start of every session, not for moments like this one, but because transparency is not a policy I apply selectively. Someone in the gallery uploaded 7 seconds of footage before the session had even ended. Not the whole session, just 7 seconds. The word, the 7 steps, the 3 seconds of stillness. The handcuffs closing. 4 million views by noon. 11 million by evening. By the following morning, it had aired on every major network in the country and been translated into 11 languages. The senator's office released a statement that afternoon. It described the detention as a procedural misunderstanding arising from the senator's understandable concern for his daughter during a stressful legal proceeding. The statement was not well received. The FBI field office contacted the court the following morning. They requested the full session transcript, the complete broadcast record, and the documentation of the pre-session phone call that Diana had noted in the record at my instruction. I provided everything. That is what records are for. The investigation opened that week, quietly, the way serious investigations begin, not with press releases, but with document requests, name by name, case by case, thread by thread. 14 months later, I read the indictments, 7 counts, and those were only the ones they could prove at that stage. The investigation reached further back than anyone in that courtroom had anticipated. 3 prior cases emerged from the record requests. 3 separate instances over the preceding 8 years in which individuals connected to Senator Voss's office had faced criminal charges that were subsequently reduced or dismissed following contact, documented contact, between the senator's staff and the presiding judicial officers in those cases. Not alleged contact, documented, phone records, emails, calendar entries, payments routed through accounts that had been, until investigators began pulling threads, entirely unremarkable line items in the operational budget of a 4-term senator's office. 7 indictments, bribery, wire fraud, conspiracy to obstruct justice, abuse of public office, 5 convictions after a 3-week trial, 11 witnesses, 4 of them former members of the senator's own staff. Senator Martin Voss resigned from the United States Senate on a Wednesday morning. His statement cited the best interests of his constituents and his family. It did not mention James Okafor. It did not mention the corner of Mercer and 9th. It did not mention the 7 seconds of footage that 11 million people had watched. It did not mention the word that ended everything. He was sentenced to 11 years in federal prison. Claudia Voss completed every condition of her sentence, on schedule, without attorneys, without appeals, without complaint. And 8 months after that hearing, she did something no one had asked her to do. On a Tuesday morning, Claudia Voss came to the corner of Mercer and 9th. She did not bring an attorney. She did not bring an aide. She did not notify anyone in advance or arrange for anyone to be present who might record the moment for reasons that would benefit her. She came alone, in a plain coat, carrying an envelope. Inside was the final installment of the restitution fund, the last number in a long column of accountability she had worked through without complaint and without appeal. James Okafor was at his corner. The cart was back in its place, new, paid for through the restitution order, positioned at the same angle it had always been positioned. Because 11 years at the same corner teaches you exactly where the morning light falls and exactly where your regulars like to stand. The chalk menu board was up. The coffee was on. The traffic on Mercer was moving at the posted speed limit. Just an ordinary city morning. Nothing exceptional happening. Nothing exceptional needing to happen. Claudia handed him the envelope. He took it. They spoke briefly, a few words, low, between just the two of them. Then Claudia left, and James Okafor went back to work. I want to say something directly to everyone watching this. 32 years on this bench, thousands of mornings, thousands of cases, thousands of people who came through that door, needing this room to mean something. A 71-year-old man with a cardiologist's appointment card in his shirt pocket. A food cart vendor with a broken leg and a pressed white shirt who came anyway. A senator in the 3rd row who had spent 20 years standing up in rooms and watching them sit back down. The word bailiff was not an act of defiance. It was not a statement. It was not something I planned or rehearsed or felt proud of in the moment. It was maintenance. The same maintenance this bench requires on every ordinary morning. The maintenance of a room that means the same thing regardless of who walks into it. The maintenance of a promise this country made to itself a long time ago, that no one stands above the law. Not because of what they carry into the room, not because of the seal on their business card, not because of the buildings with their name on the lobby plaques. Senator Voss stood up because every room had always sat down. That is not remarkable. It is the only thing. It is the entire thing. The law is not a building where some people stand inside and others watch from the street. It is either the same room for everyone, or it is not a room worth having. The moment it becomes something different, the moment the word bailiff means something different depending on who is sitting in the gallery, it stops being a courtroom and becomes something I have spent 32 years making sure it never becomes. That is what this bench is for. James Okafor is back at the corner of Mercer and 9th. The cart is there. It opens every morning. The traffic moves past at the legal speed. His regulars know where to stand. 11 years of his life at that corner. A broken bone. 41 stitches. 9 days. A crutch. A pressed white shirt. One word spoken quietly in a courtroom. And a Tuesday morning that looks like every other Tuesday morning he has ever had. That is what justice looks like when it finishes its work. If this story stayed with you, if it means something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. And the next time you're near a corner where an ordinary person is showing up and doing their work, look for that. That is what this is all about. That is what this bench has always been for.